Let's start off with one that is super common, you hear it all the time, and it's absolutely not true, and that is fish grow to the size of their aquariums. In which case we could put a blue whale baby inside of a swimming pool and it would never grow. That's incredibly not true. So what ends up happening if you stick, let's say, a goldfish, little goldfish in a 10-gallon tank? We all know goldfish, you get them at the store, they're a few inches long, but they can easily get up to 8, 12 inches, depending on the variety of goldfish we're talking about here. If you put that little 3-inch goldfish, 2-inch goldfish in a 10-gallon tank, it will try to keep growing and it will basically become stunted. And stunting a fish's growth does a number of things. It can cause deformities, but long story short, what ends up happening is you're shortening that fish's lifespan. That fish is unable to truly grow at the rate it's supposed to the size it's supposed to, and as a result, their lifespan just gets shorter. For a number of reasons, some theorize that their organs want to continue to grow, and don't have the space to do it, and you get spinal or bone deformities from not having the allotted space that species would acquire to grow to its full size. Long story short, yeah, it might slow their growth down, but it doesn't do it in a way that is safe for the fish. So ultimately, fish don't grow to the size of their aquariums. You just kill them slowly by putting them in a little box. So I highly recommend when you go to your local fish shop and you're looking at all those beautiful little fish and you want to stick them in your tank, grab an employee at that fish store or do some research on your own first, maybe even on your smartphone while you're there, and just make sure that the fish you're looking at has an adult size that's appropriate for the size aquarium you have at home. A lot of the fish that you see at the local fish store are just little babies, wee little babies, and they're going to get a lot bigger. So don't do it! Ha ha! You must change all of the water often. This is actually untrue. Really, you should be changing anywhere from a quarter to half of the aquarium water on a fairly regular basis. That's usually every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the aquarium. And that's really it. There are very few instances where you will benefit from changing all of the water, and for most aquarium owners out there, changing all of the water in one shot can actually be very, very dangerous. The reason it's dangerous is because when you're changing all of that water, there are a lot of different parameters you have to make sure are identical or as close to as identical as the water that you've removed. So obviously the parameters that we're trying to get rid of during a water change are things like ammonia, nitrate, nitrite, but things like your pH or your hardness, or most importantly, your temperature, if those are off by a decent margin, you can actually send your fish into shock, and that could be fatal. It could end the fish. They will stop being fish and they will start being corpses. So that's not good, and we don't want that to happen. So it can be very tricky to change all the water in one shot and make sure all those parameters are exact. So instead, we generally recommend, like I said, anywhere from a quarter to 50%, 25, 50% at most. And that's usually a safe amount of water, and it's pretty easy to match up the temperature close enough that through dilution with the other 50% or 75% that's in there, you're not gonna have any issues. There are people out there, discus keepers, some reef aquarium owners and such, who will do 100% water changes, but I will say that is usually expert only, and almost nobody will recommend that. So, no, it's not true. It's misconception. It's easier than that, is what I'm trying to say. Don't be scared. Aquariums aren't gonna bite you. Bottom feeders eat the poop. Let me tell you, bottom feeders like catfish, loaches, suckerfish, or any other bottom feeder really, are going to eat things like algae and small invertebrates that they find on the floor of the water body that they live in. They do not, however, eat the poo-poos. And I can just see it now. Somebody's gonna be like, Thomas, there's a fish called a scat, named so because it eats scat. And I'm gonna say, yeah, I know. And then somebody else is gonna be like, hey, Thomas, I thought like tilapias would eat the poop as well. Don't tilapia eat poop? Yes, these fish do eat poop. However, I will point out that these fish are generally in water bodies that are pretty devoid of nutrients, and they rely on large mammals eating things around the water body and then coming into it and defecating and using that water body as their toilet to bring the nutrients from those plants and other things that are on land and dropping them in the water in the form of poop, and then those fish will eat that poop to gain that nutrients that they don't have in their ecosystem because it's, outside of it on the land. That's not the same as your aquarium. And there are no real aquarium fish that are going to eat the poo-poos in your aquarium, which, trust me, I would love for that to be the case. Could you imagine if there was a organism that would eat the poop in the tank and then not poop it out ever? Because then it would just be a transfer of that ammonia from the poop that they ate into their own poop that they poop out. It would be a really weird Ouroboros kind of situation if the fish was just eating its own poop after that. Long story short, there are no fish that are going to eat poop in your tank. Bottom feeders are great though. They're going to help keep things clean. They're going to help get rid of some algae depending on what kind of bottom feeder it is. They may also help eat up any of the excess food that your fish miss and gets down to the gravel where it would otherwise rot, requiring you to take it out. So bottom feeders definitely have their place. They're a lot of fun. It's nice to see things moving around in the bottom of the tank, just, not just in the center. But they don't eat poop! Fish bowls are good for one fish. This is so far from the truth. Okay, let me preface this by saying, thanks to county fairs in the days of yore, people believe, or have believed for a very long time, that keeping something like a goldfish in a bowl by itself is an appropriate way to keep a pet fish. However, this could not be further from the truth. A fish bowl is a very inappropriate vessel for any fish for a number of reasons, but just to paint the picture for you, if you can imagine a little fish, which we already talked about stunting, but a little fish sitting in a small volume of water is going to very rapidly deteriorate that small volume of water, which is going to affect its health very quickly. It's going to lose oxygen by using up the oxygen that's there and not having any way to ripple the surface or agitate the surface for gas exchange that would normally bring more oxygen in. Any amount of food left over and poop from that fish, waste from that fish, is going to foul that water very quickly, meaning you'd have to change the water very often, which can be a somewhat dangerous practice. This is one of those situations where people tend to do 100% water changes, which can be, again, very dangerous for the fish. So not only are we leaving it to basically wallow in its own yuck, we're stunning its growth and ultimately just sentencing that poor fish to a life of, early demise. Whether that happens very quickly, which it definitely can, or drawn out over time, that fish is not going to live a full, happy, healthy life in a fish bowl. And I can hear it. People are going to be like, hey, Thomas, hey, wait. Betas are okay in bowls. We've already gone over that too. And although betas can survive in bowls a lot better than other fish due to their adaptability to that sort of situation, which can happen to them in the wild short term, it's not best to keep them like that. They do much better, thrive, grow better, live longer in a proper aquarium of a decent size. So I'm gonna go ahead and just reiterate that this is a terrible idea and we shouldn't do it. And somebody else is gonna be like, hey Thomas, but I've got this 10-gallon jar or bowl type thing, and I would love to, put some, look, if the vessel is over 5 gallons, whatever it is you're using, I'm not gonna really qualify that as a bowl anymore. We can just call that an aquarium. You can probably put an internal filter in it and change the way that the whole thing operates, and then it's really not a bowl anymore. So still not good to use bowls. Don't do it. Misconception. Another fantastic misconception: saltwater aquariums, very expensive, very difficult. Okay, this is one of those kind of half-true ones. I'll start off by saying having a saltwater aquarium can be essentially the same in terms of difficulty and cost, roughly, as just a basic freshwater aquarium. If we're comparing apples to apples, a 20 or 30 gallon freshwater tank to a 20 or 30 gallon saltwater aquarium, it's gonna be about the same, right? So if you can imagine regular community fish in the 20, 30 gallon tank on the freshwater side, and on the saltwater side, a pair of clownfish. You can keep a pair of clownfish without any extra expensive equipment. The real extra thing, the only real extra thing you're gonna be doing is adding salt to the water, specifically synthetic sea salt. And although synthetic sea salt can be expensive over time, especially with larger aquariums, for a 20-gallon tank, it's not a huge extra expense. And the difficulty of adding that salt and making sure it's the correct level is very simple. It's not hard. In fact, I've helped people get into the saltwater hobby just by showing them that keeping a small fish-only tank with some simple fish and not going crazy with it is very, very easy and very, very doable, even if you're on a budget. However, if you want to go into larger aquariums, the running costs will start to add up quite a bit more than a freshwater tank because, again, salt is fairly costly. It's not super expensive, but it is an ongoing cost you're going to have to face. The larger you go, the more fish you're going to put in the tank, the more specialized equipment you're going to start getting into, especially if you start going into reef keeping, where lighting becomes very, very important and can be quite expensive. Protein skimmers become more important and can be quite expensive. Extra circulation pumps, specific types of live rock you might want to use, substrates, so on and so forth. So yes, it can get a lot more complex and a lot more difficult with a lot more additives, with a lot more ongoing running costs from consumables and just from equipment. So yeah, it can definitely get there, but it doesn't have to. So stop making it sound like that's the only option, is what I'm trying to say. Kind of. It's what I said, I think. I said it. I did. I'm thinking back. Nailed it. If you have any questions or comments, drop those down in the comment section below. Maybe you have your own aquarium misconceptions that you've heard that I didn't list. Drop those down there and we'll start changing the way, everybody thinks about tanks because they're misconceptions and we want to unmisconceptualize them. That's a word I just came up with. So, if you haven't already, maybe hit us up on social media like Facebook. We've also got Instagram if you want to catch a little bit of aquatic eye candy. I think we got a Twitter as well. Lots of cool stuff floating around there. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe. We've got all kinds of cool content coming at you. And as always, keep on tanking with the knowledge of not misconceptualizing the stuff that is wrong and not correct, and making sure that those things stop now and don't continue on forever. There are very few aquariums out there where not doing a water change is okay, but I'm going to start this again and make it less convoluted. In most stores, myself, other seasoned aquarists. Let's try that again, me.